Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Open Up the Workforce, where we speak with leaders driving the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm your host, Ahva Sadeghi, co-founder and CEO at Symba. Today, we have a very exciting episode in store for you. I'm joined by Mason Williams, the Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Mattel. Mason has an incredible story. He's been at Mattel for over the past 13 years, picking off with designing toys and games all the way to growing into an amazing role as the leading leader for diversity, equity, inclusion. Mason, can you share a little bit more about your story, your journey with our listeners today?
Yeah, well, thank you, Ahva. I really appreciate you having me, and it was great to connect. And just the first conversation we had beforehand was really inspiring. So I'm really grateful to be here. Yeah, so my name is Mason Williams. Yes, and I work at Mattel for 13 years now. I'm the global head of DEI. I started here as a game designer, online game designer, and then I moved into a group called Connected Play, where we started actually creating the digital physical toy interactions. So any toys that were connected, physical toys that were driven by mobile technologies. I helped to lead the software division of that group from its inception in like 2011, 12 to about 2021. I was there and I did that. And then I made a complete shift in my career and was moved into the global DEI role. And it's interesting to think about because not a lot of folks say, hey, I'm going to go from being a toy designer and I'm going to go to HR. But in my mind, it was the next phase of my creative output. And I've always believed in the idea of representation, and always just from my family upbringing and kind of always, wanting to be active, wanting to be socially minded. And then also growing up in LA, which is one of the most diverse cities on earth, it just seemed like a natural progression over the course of life.
That's incredible. And I think that as we spoke about that at the beginning, it's really powerful that you have the experience of building out digital games. Can you share a little bit about what got you interested in that? And if you could share maybe what your first internship experience ever was.
It's funny. I stumbled into the toy industry, and it's funny. When I was a kid, I thought that toys literally were just made by elves or they just appeared. And I held that belief until probably I was in my late 20s. But I started in the game industry as a writer for video games, and I did some trivia games, and I had designed a board game for Strawberry Shortcake in the early 2000s. And a friend of mine at a company I used to work with worked at Mattel, and he said, hey man, I got a spot over here. We should come by and just check it out. And I had never worked for a large company. I'd never had like benefits or anything like that. Oh, this seems like a good time to think about maturing a little bit. And I fell in love with it the minute I was here. And then having designed games, or mostly digital games, over the course of a decade, I started to get a little bit disillusioned with what it meant to have millions of people play an online game, whereas I wanted to actually build things that people could see and have that visceral reaction to. And so that's when I got into the connected product side. And I'll tell you, the first time I saw a products that I had worked on or designed on the shelf in a Target, like I was staring at this family and I had a tear in my eye, and I was probably looked a little weird to them, but to me, it was like one of the most touching moments. And it's just, from there, it just was kind of steamrolled, and I just became, I've always been an avid learner, and I've always loved doing things that were like kind of going off into the unknown. And I was, luckily enough to have great friends across different parts of the company and parts of the design and development process. And it happened. So kind of like always being open to opportunities. And then
thank you for sharing that story with me. And especially as a founder myself, I can see how much hard work goes in from design, development, execution for a toy to get on the shelf. So I can understand how important and meaningful that was. And also the toy industry. And I think about my own experience growing up as a kid. I had Barbies and I love toys, and it sparks so much joy. And Mattel's having a moment, right? Barbie is making headlines. And so one of the many things that we're seeing is the notion of Barbie being an icon for empowerment and now being an icon also for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you share a little bit more about the story of Barbie and what's happening right now with our listeners?
Yeah. So if we think about it, Barbie, when she was first created by Ruth Handler, she was created to be an aspirational figure out right from the beginning, because just in the history of the way toys were designed for girls in prior to Barbie, everything was either a nurturing toy or literally paper dolling, right? So there was two ways of playing, which was a very limiting way of thinking. And I think what Ruth Handler's vision was create a figure, create an embodiment of what the possibilities of what the power of what women can do. And whether you look at Barbie's evolution, she's had more jobs than anyone else on earth, like from being an astronaut to a veterinarian to saving gorillas to she's done everything. And the progress has been an interesting progress, because we went from the power of Barbie in the beginning to then some pushback about body image, and then also about the paragon of what beauty is. And Barbie was only the Malibu Barbie or whatnot. And I think that's a valid progression. It's important to have gone through that, because when we get to 2016, add in 9 body types, you start to see an increased amount of the different hair designs, the hairstyles, the amount of skin tones that are there. This has been a progression through, and I think that right now, what this is culminating with the movie right now, where in the movie, it's very thoughtful that everyone says, "Hi Barbie, hi Barbie, hi Barbie," the idea that we are all Barbie and that Barbie can be anything. I think that's a very powerful statement. And I'm glad that we've gone through the times where there was criticism, there was critique, social critique, because that means that you have a social responsibility, and there's a place that Barbie holds, and we honor that position. And I think that's part of this story. We are all of our own personal stories are filled with not just our achievements, but the things that maybe our shortcomings that we've grown past to become who we are now. And I think that's something to celebrate.
Yes, I think that's key, that it's not that we're always right, but we're here to get it right. And we're learning across the journey, and we're getting better as we have new information. And as we learn that, this isn't inclusive, let us try to figure out how we can make it inclusive. How does that maybe play out into the design process when we think about the toy industry, the work you're doing?
Well, it's important. And so for us at Mattel, we really believe that DEI is core to our business strategy, not just as an HR initiative, but as a core business strategy, right? It's kind of simple economics, and just the way of designing a business is when you open up the pool of representation in a product, that opens up to the more channels, more fans, the ability for more fans to see themselves in the products you create. And it's not just in Barbie. It's through the way that even Hot Wheels is marketed. And we think about, how can diversity exist in a vehicle? Well, it can. Then we think about even just the representation and the accessibility of the toys and games. There's Uno for colorblind, Uno Braille. There's Uno to celebrate Pride. There's through our little people, through Fisher-Price, the little people line, you're really seeing the array of the diaspora of all the different identities people hold. And it also sets a tone for kids, right? If you play with a set of toys that everything looks different, there's a deeper respect that we have inherently for each other. And so it's really, this sets the tone for who we want our kids and even ourselves to be.
Yes, I'm really inspired by that. Do you bring in people who are part of that process to maybe be part of like discoveries, or when you think about who's leading the design of maybe a project that's supposed to be inclusive, how do you ensure those voices are at the table?
Definitely. So I would say one thing first and foremost, that all design is inclusive. There's not a moment where you say, okay, we're going to design this one inclusively, or we're going to design this for representation. Everything is done with that mindset. And one of the principles that we operate on is design with people, not for people. Meaning, if you're going to design a product that is a black doll that has black hair, well, let's make sure that we're contacting folks within the Black community. And that starts not just outside or designers outside. That starts inside our walls. We have 10 employee resource groups. Those employee resource groups, one of their key charters is to have impact on the design, have feedback on the design, and have feedback on, hey, here's a suggestion. So when we did our Lunar New Year Barbie, we're talking to folks from our API saying, hey, okay, well, this fabric, this pattern would work better. And what does that do? That builds a culture internally where everyone feels a part of something. And when you include folks from, it's great to have a person who may be in, say, procurement. They're not a toy designer, but if they're part of the community and they're in there and they're able to say, like, I gave feedback on that. What does that do for you as an employee? It makes you feel as if you're valued. You're actually there because you're valued for who you are, not for what you represent, not just to be in the room as like the API representative in the room. And okay, cool, we check the box. No, I want you there because you're Ahva. I want you there because I'm Mason, and all the things that come with that.
That's powerful. It makes me think of one of the examples at Frito-Lay when the idea of hot Cheetos came from a custodian. But if you have a truly inclusive environment, then innovation can happen because you have healthy forms of communication and everyone has a seat at the table.
Exactly. So I'll tell you, the strategy that we have, and it's like a basic DEI strategy, is that you create a diverse workforce, right? So you count the people, right? Then you have an inclusive culture, which means that people feel as if they count, right? What do you get when you add those things together? You get more collaboration, more execution, more innovation. You get a more of an aligned focus on the fans, meaning the fans, your consumers, because you reflect the world that we exist in, where we work, live, and play. And then third, we get to attract great talent. And not only that, but retain and develop that talent. And so it's not a transactional employer-employee existence. It's a path where it's mutually beneficial.
Yes, as we like to say, symbiotic, right? Both
That's right.
are gaining value.
Nice. I like the little plug there. I got you.
Yes. And as I was doing research, I saw Barbie's had over 250 careers, which is amazing. And even your own story, Mason, starting off building and designing games to now more of a function within workforce development and strategy.
Yeah.
How does Mattel, and how do you think about creating an environment where people can make these kind of lateral shifts or different shifts into different departments? Because it can oftentimes be hard to even know that's a possibility.
So it starts in a couple ways, right? First, there have to be people who go out and do it. So I think I'm an example of that. That's that person who's done it. And then that story has been told, right? So that story has been told and shared. And what that also does is that gives us the opportunity to say, hey, if you want to do these type of changes within your career, we support you, and there's resources to do it. So we have a process called like career action planning, which is like working with managers and say, what is your 1 year, 5 year plan would look like? And not just, okay, I want to get this promotion. And what is it that you want to do? What intrigues you about this company? Is there somewhere you want to learn more about? And what my journey with that started like probably back in 2017. In my CAP assessment, then I'm also drawn to prose. So I was like, I'm going to say what I believe. I've always been big on a little bit of like irrational self-confidence sometimes. And so I wrote that I believe that I could lead DEI. This is when I was it. And I believe that I could eventually find myself in a leadership position within this company. And because I care, I want to learn. And coming out of that, like the management that I work for in product development, because I said I wanted to learn more, they put me in paths to learn more about manufacturing at the time. Then I learned more about this. I was put in position. And it's because I said it. And now we're going through what we're doing. I host a series of talks at internal talks here that are called Empowering the Future, right? So we just series on, maybe it's sometimes we'll dive into the design of a product, or we'll feature career development through like the lens of executives who represent one of our ERGs. But one of the ones we did like most recently was in and around this career action planning. And we took people who've had similar journeys. You move laterally to move vertically. And there's a kind of demystifying the idea that career growth is only vertical. We know that the more you have breadth, then you actually build a stronger foundation to grow upwards. But I think tends to be a thought that like the only path forward is upwards, but that can get very teetery, and eventually you get to a point where you might teeter over. So build yourself wide and then build up as well.
Yes, and given what new skills people need to have in the workplace and how it's shifting so much, I think being open to that and being aware of that is so important as we think about like our future careers. When we first connected, Mason, I remember you sharing just your journey being a diverse leader within the toy industry. And I know some of the articles and the PR that you talked about is Mattel's doing some great work, but there's still work that needs to be done. So I'd love to get your personal experience and how you hope to create a safe environment and space where others can rise through the ranks and be a leader like you.
Yeah, well, I mean, so it starts back for me as a kid. I grew up doing Taekwondo, the Korean martial art, and I was the one Black kid who stayed within my class there. I was like excelled very heavily, like highly, all the way through college, and so I had something I was carved out in a unique space. And then through high school, I had a great diverse set of friends. Again, being from LA, like one of my closest friends is Korean, and we actually went and protected his store during the LA riots. So I grew up in this way of just learning the ropes and and being inclusive of folks, because I started to learn, even as I got to college and whatnot, being one of one in a room is difficult. And the room doesn't adjust to you. But the way that it is that the room, like I learned how to be in the room to learn to then eventually be valued for me, not just what I represented, like by looking at me or whatnot. But the important piece was like, for me is I always wanted to make sure that the next person, I was leaving a breadcrumb for someone else, meaning that when I leave this job, I want to make sure not that somebody who looks like me follows it, but somebody like me or somebody else who maybe wouldn't have gotten a shot gets a shot at the job, right? It's not about making sure you're set. I don't want to step into the role of nepotism, but I want to step into the role of inclusion, meaning open up the funnel and look outside. If I put my resume in front of you and I said, I'm applying to be the head of DEI for Mattel, you'd be like, dude, what are your qualifications? And then, but that's me on paper. But in actuality, I was very qualified for the job. So how do we make sure that we're broadening perspectives? Does everyone who wants to be a marketing manager need to have an MBA from Harvard? No. The world is changing. We have people who have great experience in the world. Does everyone have to have? Do we need to get talent from any industry, like the toy industry? Do we need to get more diverse talent from only within the toy industry? Well, no, because we're picking from a small group of a pool already. Why are we looking industry adjacent? Why are we looking over here? If there's a fashion designer, well, you know what? Fashion and toys go hand in hand. Oh, you work at Ford? You want to come make small scale cars? Like there's ways to open up the mindset. And I think that's the most important part for leaders like myself, and even irrespective of what the profession is, that if we can be the people who say, wow, it's good to bring in diversity of thought, and that diversity of thought usually comes with diversity of people, then we're doing the mission.
Yes. And if you don't do it, you honestly stifle innovation in a lot of ways. If you don't have different minds, because then you get into this consensus group thing that can actually be very catastrophic.
It's exactly like stagnation is death, right? So like because we did something great last week, I'm not going to do the same thing last week. You need to continue to grow, build upon that, right? And that's just me as a person. Also, I'm not very good at, here we got to this place. Let's kick back and celebrate. No, it's cool. Acknowledge it. And then we got to keep going, because there's an excitement that comes with progression. And I think that's something, but I also have to like kind of mitigate the like feeling as if everything has to be right now, play the long game.
Yes, that kind of makes me think about making sure that the innovation and everyone's juices are always flowing. Do you have any specific like techniques or ways that the team at Mattel does innovation workshops or strategy thinking that would really help people if they're stuck or need to break the ice on topics?
Yeah, so one of the big things we do is like when we're doing brainstorms for when in the toy side of things, on the design side of toys, is bringing in people who aren't on the design process, bringing in outside voices. Again, going back to making people feel included. It's just because I don't have a great pen hand or anything, I can't draw, but I can draw with my words and with my thoughts. So I'm in the room, and folks who are like, you know what, I had a great idea over here. Maybe it applies. And we have a thing called the virtual garage, where there's a toy challenge out, like, hey, we want to make it the next big doll idea. And that goes out globally. It doesn't go to just the design organization, because we believe that like the greatest ideas come from folks who maybe have never had that voice. So adding that voice. And then also encouraging like vulnerability. I think that there's a strength in leaders being vulnerable. And I'm thinking going back to that Empowering the Future series, is that when we have leaders telling their stories as parents, or as like the way that how do they balance their life, or how do they deal with parts of their identity, it connects with other people. Then that builds a little bit more camaraderie. Camaraderie builds comfort. Comfort builds the hey, I'm about to say something crazy. And then, you know what? Sometimes those great, crazy things are the things that, the next big hit.
Thank you for sharing those examples. I think that it's really special too in the industry you're in, because when we think about toys, we have an emotional connection, right? And it's a much bigger picture than just a specific toy or any one individual. And there are very few industries, I think, that transcend that. I think about diversity, equity, inclusion. That's also one where I'm like, this is a much bigger picture than really any one organization. As a leader in this space, do you engage with other communities? How do you kind of share what you're learning with others in the field so that we can elevate the whole practice altogether?
Yeah, well, I mean, just us becoming fast friends, and this is a way of doing it. But yeah, I go to several DEI conferences, and I've been like lucky and grateful enough to be able to be a keynote speaker at certain conferences and with others, share with our industry. I think I sit in a space that's a little bit like there's a benefit of being in the toy industry. Like you said, like the mission of the toy industry and Mattel's mission was not to create like the best toys on earth and then put some parenthetical. We're here to make the best toys on earth to inspire the wonder of childhood for all ages, anything, right? So that's why it's easier for us to have this like core connection to DEI principles, DEI activations and strategies. And so I enjoy sharing this story. And I also enjoy learning from folks who are in other industries. Like we're based in El Segundo, California, and across the street there is tons of aerospace and defense industry folks. And it's interesting. I have friends in DEI at those companies and in that industry, and I learn from them. I sit on a board of directors for a charter school. And so like learning and education and sharing. This is not a space where we hoard information. Nothing that we think or we do is precious. It should be shared. This is software development. This is open source coding. And so please take it, use it for what is best for whatever purposes that company or that person even wants.
I appreciate you sharing that, because I also went to a charter school myself and had a big, profound impact on my education and bringing. And that's our whole goal with this podcast, is to elevate the voices and the work that you're doing. When you shared a little bit about your story, I know you mentioned ERGs, and this is a rising, more investment is happening in these teams and conversations. You were president of the program of the ERG Black at Mattel. What advice and maybe guidance do you have for others who are doubling down on ERGs, who are maybe leading these, because sometimes they're under-resourced and under-supported? Would love your thoughts.
So, no, I appreciate that question. For people who are leading ERGs, well, let me step back. ERGs are typically they're not going to be overly funded, because the companies want to see the ROI on things and everything. But that is a fact, and sometimes a challenge and an obstacle, but it doesn't start the impact. So I really say, what is the company's values, and how do the ERGs align to what the company's values and purpose wants to be? Now, if they're not aligned and there's a disconnect between leadership and what ERGs are just getting their foothold, and they're just like, we need to have representation of our people and our communities. That's like step zero, right? Then it's going to be hard for the ERG to affect the business when they just need to establish table stakes. Hey, this is important. For companies that are more mature and where like the ERGs are actually seen as thought partners, leadership, I think that there's then aligning with the correct executive sponsors and getting executive sponsors to be advocates and clearing the roadblocks that may come in the disconnect between a company's leadership and the desires of the ERG. For ERG leaders, the number one thing that I talk about with all the ERGs and leaders that work at Mattel is pace yourself. This is not for you to lift for everything on your own. There is a value to having quality type of activations, be that philanthropic or dealing with or acknowledgments within celebration months or whatnot, or even like career development, to do quality over quantity, and also realize that we are playing a long game. So we don't want you to burn out, right? So, and what we find is, we going back to funding, is that what I found is that our company really values the ERG leaders. And I've seen over the course of the last couple of years, since I've really started to run the programs in as a whole, that several ERG leaders have been promoted in their jobs, right? And have seen their careers grow because of their impact. And then also their visibility goes up. And when those two things happen, and then they're also developing the leadership skills and prepping the next generation of ERG leaders. But again, it's most important is, I think, for people to take care of themselves first, because it can be easy to burn out. And I think several people burn out because they're like, well, nothing's getting done. And I don't think, and this is kind of play again. Like, we need to have patience, but there's an urgency that goes with it, but don't internalize that, because these fights have been fought for a lot of years, and they will be fought after we go as well. So keep planting the seeds, and know that what you're doing is valued.
Thank you for that optimism, because I think that anyone who works in the space oftentimes feels that challenge of that this doesn't happen overnight, and it's not a sprint, it's a really long marathon, and you keep sustaining yourself. Having that type of role does put you in a position to learn those leadership skills. And makes you wonder about a case study of how ERG leaders have advanced with their career progressions and mobility upwards in the workforce, if they were able to shorten times or more strategic partnerships. I think it's really powerful that you note that.
It has. And then for some of our ERG leads, in fact, last week I had this thing. So I try not to give too much like my opinions on what should be done and what shouldn't be done through an ERG. What I want to do is empower folks to be able to make the decisions, because we know that here's the overarching Mattel goals. Here's the DEI way that we're going to help affect those goals. So run your ERG like another part of that business unit. And folks will come to me like, Mason, I don't want to, I'm sorry. I know you're busy. Don't ever say sorry. Don't do any of this stuff. Like, you're a leader. I'm following you. I'm just having the different title, but to be honest, they're leading me. And that's what and so I think when folks hear that and they start to see that, hey, like, I am leading my own part of this own business, there's an ownership, a smile that comes to their face that I really enjoy seeing. And that really does get translated. And my job is to say, like, in meetings and when we're planning succession and we're thinking about like people's professional development, my job is to say, hey, look, person over here has been leading the ERG. Look about this impact. Think about that person as a leader. Because we're not just the day job. And there's a difference between a person's job and the role they play. And a lot of people focus on their job. Like, okay, this is what I have to do, the tasks and whatnot. But your role is actually a lot different than your job. Like, the role is, am I a leader? Am I somebody that people look to for safety? Or am I a person that's like just kind of there and you don't really notice? And are you there? So figure out what the role is. And now we're seeing people as the totality of themselves more so than ever. I think just in society as a whole, we understand that there's the importance of intersectionality, and there's the intersectionality of our identity, but there's also the intersectionality of our professional identity.
Yes, and it's where we spend so much of our time in the workplace. And I think that distinction is really powerful, because when I think about role, it makes me think about my purpose and the team that I'm empowering, the team that I serve. And we see so much clear research about having a purpose, and that at work, what that does for your presence, how long you stay there, why you care to stay there, and the work that you're doing. So I find that to be really meaningful. I'd love to learn what's next on your roadmap, Mason, as you think about diversity, equity, inclusion at Mattel and beyond.
Well, I think, so this is a weird thing to say, but my vision is that one day my role doesn't exist, that we're not having to think about the world through the eyes of diversity, equity, inclusion, and the word DEI is the acronym isn't said to me all the time. It just is. And that's the way that we function. Now we're a ways off from that, but that's kind of like that's the pseudo utopia I believe in. But what I really see in the music future for Mattel is the ability for us to continue to grow and from the momentum that we've done, like overtly, meaning you see it through like the movie and whatnot, like the way that we live our purpose to that, but even more internally, how we're starting to see the rise of diverse talent and women at the highest levels of the company, like focusing on the long game of how do we continue to make sure that we reflect the world we live in? How do we continue to make sure that this, as we go through, progress as a company, that we understand that DEI is everyone's responsibility, not a organizational responsibility, and to really celebrate each other. And then also the fact that to really make sure that everyone is included. And when I say that, is like, for me, my goal is to try and include people I don't agree with, or maybe I don't understand as much, including folks that we have an affinity for as natural as humans. Oh, I get you. Come on in. But actively going out and seeking the outside perspective, thinking of others, because I think some of the backlash that we see in society is that some of the DEI efforts are seen as, oh, we're going to take seats away from the table from cisgendered white men. Not that we're not taking any seats away. We're adding seats to the table, and we want to make sure that the table, no one's going to take your spot. No one's going to so we need to make sure that we are reassuring that the fact that we are all diverse talent, because there's something about each one of us that is diverse from everyone else that we're talking to, we're sitting around. So how do we make sure that people feel included to be themselves? And how are we making sure that we are including others that we don't completely agree with, or we have a common bridge or bond with? And as that comes out in Mattel, what we're going to see even more of is more innovation. We're going to see greater products. We're going to see that I believe that Mattel should strive to continue to be a beacon of the power of diversity, equity, inclusion as a business strategy, not a social activation or a checking the box performatively. Make your business better through the strength of inclusion.
Absolutely. And also through the product and the actual business functions that you do serve, not only internally, but also externally, the large audience that you service. And I see that over 100 Barbies, I believe, every minute are sold. It's such an amazing scale and impact of this work. Something that I'd like to wrap up our conversation today on is a question that we ask all of our speakers who come on to the show. And you kind of hit on it a little bit, but as a Tech for Good company, our mission at Symba is to open up the workforce. And to us, that means creating equitable access to jobs and wealth creation. I'd love to get your perspective on what you believe are the next steps to open up the workforce.
I think one we talked about a little bit is like looking at how do you open up the funnel? The funnel can start like whether that's at any level of job. What are there antiquated requirements that we're looking at that are immediately disqualifying people? I think and especially when we think about filtering searches or using AI to, like, if we're putting in parameters that are no longer necessary or valid, that's disqualifying probably 30 to 40% of great talent that you would never see. So that's one piece. When you think about the increase in diversity and of people and representation, where are we investing in the relationships we're building through recruiting networks, through colleges, through also then setting up programs in high schools and running programs? We have a program called the FLIP program, which is targeted at Black students in design and marketing positions. Well, we target sophomores in college, sophomores and juniors in college, and let them know that the toy industry is out there. We do a 2-day intensive internship where they basically design products and create marketing, and that's being presented to high-level folks in the company. And then some of those, we're in year 3 now. So we did 16 students in 2021. Then coming out of that, we had 3 students go into our intern class the following year. Then 2 of those students became full-time employees this year. So beginning that pathway to success and planting those seeds earlier and earlier, it goes back to the idea of if you see it, you can be it. And our job is to be able to let ourselves be seen, put our people in front of people to be seen, to inspire, to bring in. And what that does is that it creates like what I would call a sustainable ecosystem of like representation.
How powerful, Nathan. Thank you so much for sharing all of these insights with us. I really deeply believe in this notion of planting seeds early and enabling people to see where they could be headed in their career. And I think just your story alone is such a powerful representation of that, from different movements now into this space. And so bold as to say that you hope that this role doesn't exist in the future. And that was such a powerful thought for us to all kind of think about as we think about the future of what this place holds. Is there anything you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up today?
Well, I just would say thank you to you and to Symba as a whole, just because of when you reached out to me, it meant a lot. And then our first conversation, you were so open and hopeful that it made this conversation great. And I know that it's great to have like-minded folks who can help spread the word in any way possible. And I'm glad that you're probably bringing that out of everyone that you speak with. So thank you for having me. And I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mason.